Again, for those of you just joining us, we will be starting shortly. We'll just let in a couple of more guests here on the side. Welcome to everybody on the Zoom call and welcome to everybody listening in on the YouTube link. Well, and with that, let's start our today's session. We have a lot of interesting content to cover. We're super excited and super happy to have Emmanuel Faber with us today, who's going to share a lot about his story as a purpose leader, leading companies from within towards more purpose, towards more sustainability. Big thank you to all of our partners that make all of those unusual talks possible. In this case, obviously, the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, that is a long-term partner of ours, Porticus, who has been supporting us specifically in the Unusual Pioneers program. But today's session is also then co-hosted by the Boston Consulting Group, also a long-term partner of ours. Big thank you for all of the ecosystem partners. More than 15 organizations have joined the program, and with that, also the Unusual Talks to support social entrepreneurship and corporate change through entrepreneurship from within. But we will jump right into it and start the session. You'll hear a lot from Emmanuel today, but we'll have a bit of an introduction, obviously, into the journey of Danone, to frame that already and to give you a bit of perspective what we're going to be talking about. And Emmanuel can then talk about all the detailed stories behind that, but also the stories that he has brought with him that are not just a link to Danone. We know him as an inspiring leader, as an inspiring individual, and super excited to have that opportunity today. And then we will have an opportunity to have an exchange, Q&A. For those of you listening on YouTube, please do use the chat functionality to exchange. Please also do use it to post any questions. We will get to that at the end of the fireside chat that will be moderated by Saskia Broyston, our co-founder and CEO. So we'll have time to answer your questions at the end of the session. And with that, let's go into the context. The person you're seeing here is Antoine Riboud, one of the, let's say, thought leaders of Danone's sustainability and purpose background and purpose strategy in the early days. Some of his quotes you can see here is that, sustainability and impact is not an act of faith, that no company can actually thrive in a desert, that has to consider what the impact it has on the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but also the stakeholders, and that growth should no longer just be an end in itself, but a tool to serve the quality of life. It set the tone for a company, and it set the tone for a number of values that then came to life through concrete projects in the years to follow this. What I think is interesting to note is that at the time that he said that was 1972, and that's 2 years after Milton Friedman published his statement on the purpose of the company, and that the purpose of the company should be to serve its shareholders and to maximize profits. So it's really a bit of an antidote to what was, let's say, common wisdom back in the day, but really looking at how can business serve society and planet. And from there on, we were looking at an exciting and an inspiring purpose journey at Danone, with obviously its ups and downs, with its pros and cons. But we wanted to highlight where the company has gone over the last couple of years, and then hear a bit more from Emmanuel what the context of that is from his perspective. As I mentioned, it started in 1972, this dual project that Antoine Riboud was actually proposing back in the day, to look at business not just as a shareholder profit maximizer, but as an opportunity to serve people and planet. And then with a bit of time in between, and also publishing the Danone Way in 2001, which was really looking at how to assess performance of the company, not just in financial terms, but also in social and environmental terms. And then, of course, in 2006, Danone was started and was inspired to look at, well, how can Danone actually use its core skills of producing yogurt to feed malnourished children in Bangladesh. And that really was one of the elements that we are excited to hear about from Emmanuel today, and what role that had then on the company and its journey after that. So really a social business focused on impact, and predominantly focused on impact with a social business statute, which means it is created to actually serve the people, serve the planet, and then recoup the investment to the investor. So it's pay back its entire investment, but without any dividends. All profits are then reinvested into that joint venture. And interestingly, obviously, the story as it goes is that that joint venture was proposed to the shareholders because it was actually to be done from the balance sheet of the company, and shareholders needed to be asked whether they would be willing to actually contribute some of their dividends to that venture, because it couldn't be funded out of operational expenses. And famously, that led to an oversubscription, if you want to say so, to that joint venture, to that little business. More money was raised than was actually possible to be absorbed by that business, and then led ultimately to the creation of the Danone Communities Fund that used that money to invest into more social businesses until today. In 2007, then, the new Danone was formed to focus the company on health and on its role in health. Really reshape that mission, which ultimately then led to One Health, One Planet mission that it is today, combining the role it has on people and planet with the products that it sells. And in 2008, impact compensation for executive leaders was introduced, and 30% of the compensation for board members was actually contingent on impact metrics. And then after Emmanuel became the CEO of Danone in 2014, the B Corp certification was initiated after an acquisition, and then culminating also in 2020 in making Danone an intrapreneurship mission, and changing the articles of association at Danone to really integrate the mission, integrate the purpose into the company. And that was really where, Emmanuel's leadership showed as a way to show that a huge company like Danone can actually become B Corp certified, can change its mission, even in the statutes. And that was at a time in 2015 when there were very, very few large companies that actually had B Corp certification. So I'm really excited personally to learn more about that journey, and possibly also the many conversations that led to it, the many conversations that were going on in the organization. And then, of course, in 2021, the activist investor campaign kicked in that ultimately led to Emmanuel leaving the company based on a focus on the campaign on performance, focus on financial performance, and also very curious to hear what came out of that. And activist investors, for everyone obviously that is not so familiar with the financial space, an activist investor focuses on maximizing the performance of a company, maximizing the financial performance of the company, and thereby actively pushing out existing management and replacing it with management they think can serve that mission, that financial mission, the best. Well, that at least was how we saw activist investors in the past. So in this case, it was Bluebell Capital Partners that was one of the leaders in that campaign in 2021. But we also saw a different shape of activist investor this year, which is engine number one, which really pushed Exxon to change some of its key board members to become more, not just climate focused, but also climate educated. And so we are seeing that the old tools of the old economy are also used towards pushing the boundaries of what we need to achieve in order to fight climate change and find the inequality we see in the world. So as tragic as that development was in terms of the activist investor campaign at Danone, it also shows that the same tool can be used for different purposes. And our times are flying quickly, and we are more used to seeing change happening quickly with social media, promoting so much new things every day in and out, with a time horizon of days, weeks, in best case months. But we're really talking about how can we actually change how companies contribute to society, change how companies are assessed in terms of how they create value and what kind of value they create. So we really need new roads. We need to build new roads when we want to think about business as a tool for society going forward. And Professor Yunus puts it in a way, if we want to go in a different direction, we need to build new roads. And this is the premise on which we are building our work with the Unusual Pioneers. So really having people that dare to steer out there, to venture out there into areas that have not yet been explored, into areas that have not yet been addressed, and as in that role also stick their heads out for criticism and ultimately for, let's say, impacts on their careers and impacts on their CVs. And we're living in faster times, but if you look at pioneers in the past, everyone was more used to what is called cathedral thinking. So used to thinking beyond one's own lifetime and thinking about the impact that one could have on the world, even beyond their own timelines. So Columbus really didn't see and realize what he had achieved until after his death was actually then focused on, realized that he had discovered a new continent. We had women's suffrage with Susan B. Anthony, who never actually got to vote, or Martin Luther King, who obviously never realized or never lived to actually see the realization of the abolishment of segregation in the United States. So we live in faster times, and hopefully all the pioneers we're supporting will still live to see what they have started, to live the change that they have initiated. And I certainly wish that for Emmanuel. But we also need to realize and recognize that what we're trying to do here is significant and hard change. It changes systems. It's kind of a Don Quixote approach at fighting the windmills sometimes, but it's really inspiring to see that the change is accelerating. The change is actually becoming faster and faster, and that we need pioneers like Emmanuel and others to continue pushing the boundaries. Now, with that little premise, with that little preface, I want to hand over to Saskia, who's going to properly introduce Emmanuel. And I want to thank you again today, Emmanuel, for coming on, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Dan. I'll take it from here. So first of all, a big welcome to you, Emmanuel. We are absolutely honored, and it's a total pleasure to now spend the next hour, and for some of us the next 1.5 hours with you. I have the pleasure to call you a friend. We were able to meet over 12 years ago when you had just started Grameen Danone, and Professor Yunus then mentioned, oh, Emmanuel, you have to talk to Emmanuel. He's the one that's going to help you also get other German corporates and European corporates to understand about the social business idea. And I think we met in your headquarters in Paris, and we brought folks from another company that we were working with at that stage to help learn about the social business journey that you had gone through at Danone. And I already remember back then how impressed I was by you, how you were sort of swimming against the stream, not sort of going along the conventional knowledge of shareholder value maximization, but already then thinking of business as having a strong and much broader impact on society and for the planet. So I remember back then already sort of my fanhood for you did start. I will put it out there. Obviously for everyone else that doesn't know Emmanuel, he started his career in a very traditional way as a management consultant, just like I did, but in your case at Bain, went into investment banking, and then eventually became the chief financial officer and head of strategy at Danone. And then eventually, I believe in 2015, you became the CEO of Danone, and have been working ever since, until beginning of this year as their CEO and also later chairman. So quite an impressive career, obviously. But most importantly for this conversation, as I said, you've really been a corporate purpose leader in terms of trying to make corporations a force for good. And I've also had the honor to serve with you on the board of the Corporate Action Tank for Social Business, which you set up in France with 10 other corporations that are all implementing social business in France as well. So we've had the chance to work more closely there. In any case, I know everyone knows how many prizes and recognitions Emmanuel has had, so I won't mention them, but obviously it's a great honor to have you here. And today I really want to speak to you about, or ask you much more about, how do we actually change companies to become a force for good? I think everyone in the room here, social entrepreneurs, executives, and of course also the broader audience on YouTube, are pretty much convinced that corporations can have an effect on a society and the planet, a positive one. The questions are really, what are the nuts and bolts, and what are the real elements that you need to change in a company to actually make that happen? Can you tell us what are perhaps the 3-4 main building blocks that you think need to be changed?
Yep. Thanks, my friend Saskia. Thank you, Danny, for the nice introduction. Super happy to spend time with you. You're a great and very important crowd for the future of the world, because if you've been participating to this program, it's because you want to have more impact than what you have today. So congratulations for that. I would really commend that, and I'd say I certainly would rely on the energy of people like you guys to continue to make the necessary and urgent changes that we need to see happen in the world. So the perspective I could share with you and our audience, Saskia, on how to drive change, I'd say probably four big levers. The first is that change needs to address the fundamentals of the company itself. There will not be a systemic big impact of change if it's only on the marginal things, the small things, the nice CSR stuff. The change only happens if you are really talking about the core business of the company, which means that if you take this core business, you have to ask yourself the question of, what am I useful for as a company? What is the purpose that I serve? What is the best that I can bring to the world? And the world would be would be less better off, I would say, than if my company did not exist. So if you start, and this is why I strongly believe that it all starts with the mission and the purpose, defining what is unique, truly unique about the company, how it can change the world through its business processes. And by the way, I believe that this is a competitive advantage. We can come back to that. The second, I think, is allow the governance to adapt to this. It might mean a number of things depending on each company and where they are, and whether they are a cooperative or a social entrepreneur company or a big listed company. But adjusting the governance to the mission, I think, is fundamental. Of course, for us, for Danone, it meant go up to the entreprise à mission, which was the ultimate stage, and we can come back to that. But this adjustment, I think, is fundamental if you want the change to be lasting and not depending on just one super, committed social entrepreneur somewhere, whether that person is, a new employee in the company, a new hire from university, or whether that person is the CEO. But people, they come and go. Institutions stay and the mission stays, and this is why it's very important to incorporate that in the governance at some point. The third is about incentives, and that is a very easy one to do. It's like overnight you can decide. The day we started, as Danny was reminding us when we started the carbon compensation, we actually also started the carbon reduction. And that was in 2009. And we had this big discussion at the executive committee of the company, where most of the people were saying, okay, we will put some bonus on the CO2, but we don't know how to measure CO2. So it's going to, let's make 5% of the bonus, because this way we will learn and test, and then after some time we'll be able to make it bigger. And some had a different view, and I certainly had a different view, which is that in this case, let's use the human energy, make it 30% of the bonus. We don't know how to measure it, but as we are managers, we hate just to pour money out of the window. We want our money to really go on precise stuff. So because it is 30% of the bonus, I am sure that in 1 year, we will know precisely how to measure. And we will put money on CO2 measurement, which we did. So, putting your mouth and your money where you're saying where you need to go, the same at the same place is very important, and it's not difficult. And the last thing is the metrics. I mentioned them briefly. You need a metric to design the roadmap of where you want to go, and you need the metrics to design the incentives. And I also believe that in a way, the metrics are important to evaluate the governance and ultimately the strategy. And the one thing that certainly I will leave, or maybe I'm optimistic, but which will happen in the very near future now, is that finally we will have metrics for climate and social issues at the IFRS level, the International Financial Reporting Standards, in a matter of now probably a couple of years, not more than this. So finally, there will be a way to rethink finance and business. But yes, metrics are absolutely fundamental if you want to drive that change.
Fantastic. So what I'm hearing is basically making sure the purpose is anchored in the company and that it is a unique purpose, that we adjust the governance, that we have the right incentives for managers because you only do whatever you're paid for, and that we have in general metrics that go beyond just the financial metrics. So perhaps maybe I can just dig deeper into, I think the purpose one, I think people are pretty much aware at this stage, but perhaps digging a bit deeper now on the governance topic. Sounds like an extremely dry topic, but one that can be quite exciting. If you want to just share one or two concrete examples of what you did at Danone on the governance, and I want to also dig one step deeper into the incentives and metrics before we move on to other questions, if that's fine. So let's start with the governance one. Sounds boring, but can be exciting.
No, it is not. It is not, because with governance comes the overall infrastructure and the framework that you give to your intrapreneurship program of change. Dan was mentioning about Danone communities. When we formed Danone communities with the purpose of supporting social businesses were about businesses where any profit that you make is plowed back into the mission of the business. So dividend, no, there is no dividend to shareholders. So this is outside of the metrics of a large listed company. So we created a separate entity where we very carefully designed the relationship between Danone communities and Danone, which went up to creating a special committee of the board of Danone to look after the responsibility of Danone communities. And the topics that we had, for instance, to discuss were, Danone is using recipes or ferments in Bangladesh that we are taking from our global ferment bank to ferment the yogurt. Are we going to do it for free, or are we going to do it for a payment? Because at some point in time, maybe that business is going to be very successful. And if one day Danone wants to enter into Bangladesh with our regular business, well, the Grameen Danone and the Shakti Doi brand may be all over the place, and the market does not exist anymore. So how do we deal with this conflict of interest? By the way, the use of the Danone name for the first time ever, we agreed to put the Danone name within another logo, the Grameen name. So in Bangladesh, The Grameen House is giving shelter to the Danone brand, and Danone is inside Grameen in the logo. So this is something totally new, and we had to decide whether this was okay or not okay. And by the way, would the Danone name become for free, and what are the food safety regulations that we are going to follow in Bangladesh that would allow Bangladesh to operate safely on Danone? Because if there is a problem one day on food safety in Bangladesh, people won't go after Grameen, they will go after Danone. So all these topics were listed one by one to ensure that we had a due process that would cover not only Grameen Danone, but after some years, the 10 different projects that we had. And what I can say is that on any new social innovation, significant social innovation, we created a special governance. We thought all the governance in a way that was appropriate. And of course, the board of Danone Communities was not the board of Danone. So we asked Professor Yunus to be co-chair of that board, and we had people from official development agencies, we had people from Ashoka, we had people from the UN, experts in nutrition. This design of the governance is really a very important step if you want that the change sticks and that the adventure is being steered in a manner which is consistent with its purpose. And I have many more examples if you want.
Fantastic. So I think you now are even honing in specifically on like the social intrapreneurship initiatives that you would develop within Danone and what the governance is. We may just skip now, obviously, the whole side of like you as a whole corporation now becoming an entreprise à mission, but I'm sure we have more, which is a new, obviously, legal setup and structure, but we can perhaps also get into that later. And I'm sure that people will have questions around this. Just also around the incentives, because I think this is a very, very important point. We're always speaking about the corporate immune system. So the system within corporates that kills off anything that doesn't look like short-term profits. And that's obviously the role of, management within the entire corporation. But if you actually change that management compensation, you can also change that type of behavior. Can you make it a bit concrete? I mean, on the environmental side, what kind of KPIs did you put in place to make it measurable? And also on the social side, where we often have less of a good, let's say, currency, rather than like the CO2 that we have on the environmental side, what kind of KPIs did you actually use? So make it concrete, because these people in the room here are managers and they want to know what to do on their end as well.
Yes, well, there are obviously sub KPIs and bigger KPIs. On climate, we actually worked for 1 year with SAP to co-develop with them an SAP module that will be able to calculate the CO2 footprint of FMCG products. Mm-hmm. After 1 year, it worked, and we started actually to co-market it to the rest of the industry, open source, as the platform. So we use that platform, and we were able to calculate the CO2 impact of our products, and therefore incentivize managers on that CO2 impact and CO2 reduction. The result of that is basically that we picked the total emissions scope 3 picked 5 years ahead of schedule and 18 months ahead of the SBTi 1.5 degree commitments that we had made later on. We had other nature KPIs, but the main KPIs has always been CO2 footprint. But we have water reduction and zero net waters, etc. Of course. Then on social, you have a bunch of very, I would say, operational KPIs: inclusion and diversity, gender pay gap, personal safety at work, so workers' health, basically. But we also used lately a bigger KPI, which is the sustainable engagement of employees. So because we believe that everything starts with people and ends with people, basically they are the energy of the company. They are the ones that are making the mission happen and the impact. So the level of how engaged they are in what they do and with the mission and the purpose and the culture of the company and their jobs and their pay and etc. in a sustainable manner because you might have people very committed, but with a level of energy that may not match that because there's too much pressure, too much stress, etc. So sustainable engagement, not over engagement, not under engagement. We have measured with Tower Watson's database, which we've been using for 15 years, and have benchmarked against all the industry. And we have used that as a metric for ultimately how we want to perform in terms of HR, and consistently being above our peers and in the high performing norm when it comes to sustainable engagement. As I said, purpose and engagement are meant to be competitive advantage. And if the company has the right mission and the company wins, then the mission wins. It needs to be very clear. I'd like to add one more thing to this, Saskia, which is that we have actually turned these metrics also to become a source of competitiveness on the financial market. In 2017, we negotiated a 2 billion euro syndicated loan with 12 of the largest banks in the world, where we use 2 ESG metrics to reduce the payment of interest, the margin on interest, the interest rate. One was the B Corp certification of Danone. So the more we were certified B Corp, the lower the interest rate. And the other one was the climate disclosure project, the CDP rating. Danone was rated a AAA, one of the 6 companies out of 3,000. So AAA, and maintaining that rating over time was gaining us savings on the interest rate as well. So it's also to say that finance starts to understand that a company that is more resilient, that has a highly engaged base of employees, a B Corp certification, positive impact on climate, has a better credit rating than a company that does not. So this is also why the metrics are so important. It's because they create incentives, but not only for employees, they also create incentives in terms of getting the right capital at the right price.
I think that's a fascinating point also, that you actually get better financing, lower priced financing because of positive ESG metrics. What do you say, and maybe I'll just a quick interlude because I do want to come more to the social entrepreneurship topic, but what do you say to the critics that say, oh my God, with ESG, there's just so much to measure. A CEO just doesn't have time to focus anymore on what they need to focus on. How do you deal with that type of criticism?
I think that a CEO that says that should not be a CEO.
Good. I think that was a fast, clear answer.
not because he would not save the world, because his or her company will just be down. Mm. You know, we are not anymore in a linear world where nobody cares for climate and nobody cares for social. You have social media all over the place. Your employees are talking to everyone and whenever they want on social media. You can't hide anything anymore much. And so at some point in time, if you do not work properly on what is your positive impact, whether that's on climate, nature, gender diversity or whatever it is, you will be caught. And you will lose because investors, I mean, just look, you were mentioning Engine One, Dan, earlier. Look at happened at Shell. Shell, you had a vast majority of shareholders that agreed to vote for the 90% agreed to vote for the carbon reduction proposed by the board. And then activists proposed a different resolution with a significantly higher one. And 30% of shareholders, the same that voted for the other resolution, also voted for this one, which makes no sense. So the company now has to talk to everyone. But if you ask those people of why did they vote on one side for what the board was doing, but against because another resolution came and said, we want more, and why they went for this one and checked that box is because they receive pressure from the people that give us their money for management. Mm-hmm. So pension funds are under pressure. Money market funds are under pressure to invest, because it's very hard if you are in the oil investment and you invest in oil to not be supporting activism that supports a higher CO2 standard. This is what they tell you. So the pressure is also coming there. So again, if you don't work on your ESG, you shouldn't be a CEO.
No, I think that was a pretty clear answer, and I think that was very helpful in terms of context. So Emmanuel, let's maybe come down to the very concrete topic of social business and also, of course, corporate social intrapreneurship. And I mean, we've now spoken about that broader picture of how do we transform the whole corporation into a force for good. But what role do sort of concrete examples like social businesses or funds or whatever that you've had in your journey, what role do they actually play in this broader transformation of the corporation? Tell us about that. And perhaps you can even tell us a little bit about, you know, how it all started for you and how you got involved in this.
Well, I think that, first of all, you have intrapreneurship and then you have social intrapreneurship. So intrapreneurship is basically a situation where companies try to replicate the behavior and the dynamics of much smaller enterprises to make things grow or change within the organization in a way that it is protected from the big pyramid. And second, in a way that it can impact and infect, in a way, the rest of the pyramid and therefore change the culture. So this, for me, is intrapreneurship. And it can apply whether you're doing this for the mission, for money, or whatever. And it's a solidly recognized management practice, well documented. And I guess everyone around this room is much, closer to it than I am in terms of knowing and understanding the pros and the cons, etc. Bon. Then you have the intrapreneurship, which is applied to social innovation. And this is where that meets the two worlds. And I'm absolutely clear that most of the time, the only way to have significant social innovation impacting enough the information, the organization, is to protect it in the form of intrapreneurship. Danone Communities was a very good example. Danone Communities has impacted Danone much more with its governance and what it did and the reverse innovation that we applied to it, including a super small factory, 100 times smaller than any of the factories we would build in the world. And yet with a reversed effect of scale, because we needed a capex per ton, which was a third of the average capex per ton of Danone. If we hadn't put the structure, the right governance around it in terms of intrapreneurship, we would never have done anything like this. And therefore, we wouldn't have put a new dot on the curve of the capex ratios and what is the benchmark. And we basically created an entirely new space for reasoning about how do we address base of the pyramid in other countries, etc., etc. So this is where really I think that social entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship is really nurturing the company's reverse innovation ability. And to do this, and again, you need to protect it this way. Now you're speaking about me. That was slightly different because when I I joined Danone in '97. 2 years after I sat on the executive committee team, the global executive committee team, I was appointed as CFO and strategy, ran a few businesses. And 2 years later, I was on the board of directors. I've actually been on the board of directors for 20 years because I was appointed when I was, 34 or something. I had a sort of a particular position. I was not an intrapreneur with 10 more people to convince on top of me. I just had to knock on the door of the CEO of at that time, discuss, we agreed, and then I would had to manage all the complex relationship and the guys at against and for, etc. That was, as normal politics in any change process. But I was, I really had already quite the ability to make an impact at scale within the company. The big question for me in terms of leadership for all of us is how much risks are we prepared to play and to take on the power that we've been given, the mandate that we have. We all have a mandate in the company, whether you are the CEO or whether you are a young employee coming from university or from technical schools, you have a mandate. How much of a mandate are you actually ready to challenge in order to push the boundaries further and get things to happen, which truly for me is what leadership means. And I think social and intrapreneurs within companies are agents of change. And beyond everything that I said before, I think the level of impact that they will have, that you guys will have, is a pretty direct correlation to how much daring you are to basically lose your job. It's as simple as that, because you're bigger than your job, your mission is bigger than your job. And if you think that's the right thing to do, you do it. And it's a matter of dancing with that all the time, but trying to be as free as possible about that topic so that you can take the right amount of risks to get things done. And frankly, even as the CFO of the company, I wasn't able to convince everyone at the same time. Even my boss, I had to come back in several times, etc., etc. And it's a dance and it's collective. It never happens alone. So you need to have and take the time of bringing people around you. And if they feel your courage and your dedication to the company, because the very important point is that you can be a social intrapreneur and a change agent and activist if anyone in the company knows that you're not doing this for you, you're doing this because you're convinced that the right thing to do for the company.
Got it. No, wonderful. And I think what I hear from you, it's of course also a driver of innovation, which I think I've heard from you a number of times, but also that we need to find a way to shelter those types of structures, those types of innovations, because they're of course not the business as normal. And I think one thing that you had mentioned to me another time is also, that these examples are reinforcing the purpose. Those are concrete examples that make the purpose concrete. And that's, I think, another important point, because sometimes we have this beautiful statement and then people don't really know what is actually meant by that. So that's another thing that you had mentioned in the past. Emmanuel, sadly, we're running a little bit out of time before people want to ask additional questions. So I just want to ask you one final question before we ask the audience to also post their questions in the chat and of course on YouTube. And we're consolidating them, and Dan is going to ask them to you in a second. Perhaps just one question. I know we mentioned earlier that you left Danone this summer, and that was also in part driven by activist investors, not the good kind, that thought that you shouldn't continue being there anymore. And I'm just asking myself, what does that mean sort of for future CEOs that are as visionary as you and that try and use their company as a force for good? Does this mean that they should all be scared now and start kind of focusing on shareholder value maximization? Or what does this mean for the movement at large? And what advice do you have to those kind of CEOs that are trying to move that same path?
Well, I would have a simple advice, I think, because yes, there were a few very small activists. One of them, which was mentioned, even not a serious one. I mean, what they were proposing was just bullshit. So they were there. And personally, let me start by saying, I think activists are an important part of the game. I wouldn't go against activism. I mean, I am an activist. And so I wouldn't blame anyone to be an activist. I think activists who do pressure management boards on something that they're convinced about, and they actually do the real job of a shareholder, and so I've got nothing against that. Now you can have some sort of smaller guys that have just bullshit and we shouldn't even care about them. You have some more reasonable guys and you deal with them. And indeed, you were mentioning Engine One, but there are others that are also pushing for ESG and even more so. So let's not be against activism. And yes, there are easy ones and there are less easy ones. The big question in the case of Danone was not the activist, was the board. The activist used some politics within the board that had felt that they could increase their power or come back to power when they are the other, and it would be a very convenient thing to let that that guy go, basically. And so in a matter of a few weeks, not even to say a few days, they created this alliance. So the end of the story, by the way, nobody probably noticed, but that was on the 29th of July when the whole board decided formally and publicly that they would all resign because they had no credibility to the 98% of shareholders that had voted for what I was suggesting. So it's really a matter of a few individuals trying to derail that for their particular opportunistic strategies. So my advice to the board, to CEOs is, even if you think that you know people for long, make sure you have the right board, and a board that's fundamentally as courageous and as visionary as the company should have, because that was not the case with Danone.
Thank you. That's a clear statement. Emmanuel, I'll thank you here. This is the end of my asking you question, and I'll hand over to Dan, who wants to ask all of the audience questions to you right now in the next couple of minutes that we have. Dan, over to you. Thank you so much.
I'm not quite sure. Thanks, Emmanuel. I'm not quite sure whether we're going to be able to get through all of the questions, but at least a few maybe are possible. Let me start actually with one thing, because you also emphasized it quite early on, which is focus on incentive structures and how you actually implemented them. There were a couple linked to that. Maybe one, just to start with, what were the concrete measures that you had implemented for yourself as a CEO, and how did that change over time? And what was the process of getting the board into agreement for those?
Well, I didn't have to change much in terms of my own incentives, because we had long established that for the executive committee teams and for the CEO, there would be a balanced set of objectives, whether on the short-term incentive and the long-term incentives. So I had an economic structure of incentives, looking at the profits of the company, and the guidance, the financial guidance that we had given to the market. I had a managerial one, which was really about changing the organization and improving the organization, and big projects and launch, and building factories, etc., acquisitions. And then I had a set of non-financial, non-economic, which was about the social and essentially the social and the nature agenda. So I had a very balanced one. So I didn't have to change this much. What I paid a lot of attention to was the global CEO pay, because I felt that we had gone too far in terms of too much money allocated to the chair and CEO. So my sort of fight with the board was really about not getting my pay changed for the last 7 years, and it didn't change. But I can tell you it's not easy, but it's got nothing to do, I guess, with the question of incentives.
No, but that's super interesting to hear. And maybe then moving on to the other questions about incentives, and there were two that were sort of similar, where one audience member was asking, is there a potential to over-focus on incentives and thereby reducing the intrinsic motivation of people inside of the organization, and as they're hopefully steered by values and of the company, but also themselves? So can you set too many incentives? And Mark, also from the YouTube listeners, was asking a similar way, is there value in the principle of obliquity? So really achieving objectives in an indirect way. So not directly focusing on happiness, but going around to say, have a job that pays well, but it also makes you happy, in that way achieving happiness.
Wow. So the first question, yes. Incentives are not the solution. I think they are an important part to create a consistent solution. the question of over-focusing, I have heard that from a number of companies, actually. And actually some very strong culture companies. I mean, companies that have very strong culture, a very strong sense of belonging. Some of them already, big values, family companies in particular. I have a couple of ones in my mind. It's interesting because the discussion I had with their CEOs and CFOs was, we don't want to incentivize people to do good. We believe that they are doing this because of the value of the company, and we believe that as a company, because we have these values, we are also having a positive impact. And while I would be very reluctant to go as far as this, I still believe that yes, there is something about that's true about this. Some people, some companies believe and feel that legitimately that you don't want to pay people to do good. You want people to do their job, and because they are good people, they will do good. So it's really a matter of balancing the culture of the company, who the people are, etc. Yet, I think you should start by asking yourself the question of incentive, and then maybe reduce the size of this question depending on the local conditions, the company conditions. I'm not quite sure about what the next question was exactly, but I heard money and happiness. And that just triggers for me one thing, and I will be super short on this, which is that for many, many people, I mean, all of us, we're working because we need to work. And therefore, making money is very important. And it's also very important because it's a recognition of the community about my work and the satisfaction of the broader collective about what I do. But we all know that past a certain level, we are not working only for that. And many of the future leaders of companies have options of where they want to work. Of course, this is a luxury and this is a privilege. And all of you who have that, you need to look at it as an incredible privilege. That privilege is the freedom to choose where you want to work. But that privilege comes with a responsibility, which is that it cannot be only about money. And your next job is a job where you feel that yourself profoundly as a person, you're going to be fulfilled in your own leadership journey, in your journey of becoming more of who you truly are or aspire to be, which will be about having a direct impact through your job. Because your job, whether you want it or not, but you look at it, including now with everything that we have on distance work, etc., is going to be at least 2/3 of your life. So if you do not think about your impact, direct impact, for 2/3 of your life, I don't think you would reach the same kind of profound happiness that you might reach if you do that. Not to say that you wouldn't be happy, obviously.
Awesome, love that. I think everyone here can subscribe to that, and thanks for making that clear. Caroline had a question, Caroline Bryant from Portuguese, to really understand, what do you think is the strongest lever that pushes a corporation to transform? Is it a strong CEO, or is it a strong value system? Is it a culture? So what's number one for you?
I don't think there is one answer to this. You have to be situational. Because the world, as you said, is moving super fast, changing super fast. It all depends on the company's agenda. If the governance is not working, then it's probably because the values would probably be where you want to start with. If the values do not exist, or they are not strongly recognized, understood, etc., you probably need to start somewhere else. The one thing I would add to encourage all of you is that I'm absolutely certain that the middle management and higher management in the future will have an absolutely critical role in changing the agenda of companies. I have seen collectives of employees, including in companies that appeared in the chat box, large French companies that have organized themselves together as a collective. In France, there are more like 100 now of them working together. And they are working to encourage their top management to go faster on the transition. And as Richard Edelman just said in a post that I reposted yesterday, as a CEO, you cannot not listen to them because they are the future leaders of your company in 10 years, in 15 years. It's no doubt the leaders are there. So you have the luxury of having the future leaders expressing where they want to go. And so when you don't know where to start, I think finding colleagues that are like-minded, that are ready to do what I said earlier about leadership versus power and exercise collective leadership in the company, you should definitely try to do this. And I think that you will see that you have a number of colleagues that actually are looking for those conversations to happen. And social media and so much now exist that it can work. And this is making a change on the agenda of companies.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much, Emmanuel. The last question I just have before I want to give a bit of an overview of what's next. And of course, we'll stay on here with this group on Zoom, but we'll have to cut the YouTube link in a couple of minutes. But there was one very important question in the YouTube audience, which was, well, what's next for you as a future leader?
Thank you for the question. I don't know. I guess a number of you know how I describe my current status on LinkedIn and others. I'm a CEO and I'm a climate and social business activist. So I will continue to do that because I feel that's where I can impact. But it can take many different shapes and forms. So I just want to take my time because I have this incredible privilege to basically be free about choosing every day what I want to do right now. I have worked like crazy for the last 30 years. So before I go back to work like crazy for the next 10 years, I just want to have a pause. And so I'm joyfully exploring a number of possibilities, and I will keep you updated, my friends. Don't worry, I won't be far.
We're very much looking forward to that. Thanks.
Lovely.
Awesome. Now, again, before we switch, let me just quickly give you a bit of an overview of what's happening in the next couple of weeks for those joining us on YouTube, because there's a number of interesting conversations coming up, just like this one. We'll have already on September 28th at 1 p.m., same time as today, we will have a conversation with Benoit Bonello, who's a social innovation director at Suez, very much working on similar topics that Emmanuel has outlined in terms of intrapreneurship and social innovation. So really exciting to have him online. It's then also going to be a Zoom call for everyone so that you can actually also interact with others dialing in. At the moment, just possible through chat, but later on then also through Zoom. Also on October 5th, we had the chance to develop a couple of research papers together with great organizations like Acumen and the COVID Response Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs on social procurement. So really also focusing on how can companies work with social businesses. We want to give you an overview of how that can happen, what the challenges are, and what the success factors are. And then there's many, many other ecosystem events that are coming up in the next couple of months. It's really the opportunity to go out and meet people again, either virtually or in person. But we wanted to get this on the agenda for you. There's a Sustainable Development Impact Summit of the World Economic Forum, the Social Entrepreneurship World Forum, also organized on 28th of September. Business Fights Poverty will have their Global Goals Summit, where you'll also get a chance to hear about best practices in corporate social business collaboration. SOCAP, COP26, of course, Impact Fest in The Hague. So if you're interested in any of these events, just stay tuned, sign up to our Unusual Pioneers LinkedIn page and Social Business newsletter. We'll keep you updated on all of these events, all of those great organizations that are pushing this space and pushing impact, both inside of companies, but also for social entrepreneurs. And with that, thank you to the audience on YouTube. Thanks for joining in today. We will be reaching out and giving you more content in the next couple of weeks to listen to.